True Story is a documentary podcast powered by the Institute of Documentary Film. You can find news from the world of film on all the common platforms such as iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, as well as on docweb.net.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's panel. My name is Milena Zajović, and I'm a journalist and activist from Croatia. I will be hosting KineDok's discussion about migration and refugee crisis based on the film The Wire. And we have three panelists with us tonight. First, there is Zoran Stevanovic, who is a very experienced journalist, but also the UNHCR Central Europe's Regional Communications Officer. We have András Kováts, who is a researcher and the director of the Hungarian Association for Migrants. And last but not the least, very important, tonight we have Tiha Gudac, who is the author of the film that you have all, I hope, watched. And she is a documentary director, script writer, and a producer from Croatia. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our panelists. And maybe to break the ice, my first question would be to Tiha. First of all, congratulations for the film. I think it's a very important one, and it won multiple awards already. It had a cinema distribution also in Croatia, which is not something every documentary manages to have. So now, with a little bit of a distance, how do you see your own film, and what are the memories you have of this process of preparing it?
Well, good evening, everyone. First of all, it may seem like a polite thing to say, but it's really not just politeness. I'd like to say I'm really, really feel deeply privileged, and I'm grateful for events like this and initiatives such as KineDok, and for people who are devoted to bringing forward less known stories, which usually come through author documentary formats, which are so scarcely available in this hyper production of cinema and TV. So there is a distance, there is time, but I'm still surprised that through this time the film is communicating. That is, as I said, it's really not just a thing to say. I am grateful for every conversation that the film opens. And obviously, when you're working on a film, I worked on a film it took 5 years to finance and to find the finances, which of course means a lot of pitching and written proposals and so on, and open questions in whether this film will ever exist. And then it took us about 1.5 years to film it. And then we started editing just a few days before the lockdowns, and it was an international co-production. So we had to go home and finish over Skype. So it was all a little crazy. But when I go into film processes like this was my second film, which I worked on for such a long time. I become deeply immersed in the process, and I kind of gain a tunnel vision. And when I'm in that process, obviously, I always get into the place where I have no idea and absolutely no perception of how this film will work. So you just hope for the best, and you go forward with the idea that you will kind of do the justice to what you witnessed behind the camera. And the idea was, from the beginning, this film is a part of a bigger project called The Borderline, which was started by a Belgian producer, Frederick Nicolai, who wanted to gather multiple European directors to do stories about different borders, outer borders of Europe. And we had complete freedom. At the end, there were 6 films. and I had one task: to make a film about the wire, and that was all we knew. So it was, as I said, it was a long process, and I even had, when we were filming, some of my crew objected me for not directing, I quote, because when I go into the field, I become deeply immersed in the process, and I'm just more about listening and watching than interfering with what is happening before me. So yeah, I'm still deeply taken aback by the fact that this film seems to be doing something which I hoped would come across, mostly that it would open conversation and convey conditions with which I came across working on the film.
Zoran, you as also a person who spent most of the life in front and behind the camera, I think it would be interesting to hear your impression of the film, but also as a person who has been dealing with the migration routes in the Western Balkans and a bit wider than that for the past years, maybe you could also update us a bit. What has changed since the moment the film was being shot?
Well, first of all, like, I have to say, it's an excellent film. It's very difficult to do films like this. A documentary film is a format that really needs some sort of skills and good filmmaking. When I was involved in production of Romeo and Juliet in Sarajevo, about a couple who got killed in a no man's land in Sarajevo during the siege, I realized how difficult it is to tell a story with facts and pictures. So, this is great film. Now, this film speaks about the wire and a clear division between two countries, and barbed wire was erected, for the reason of stopping, migrants and refugees. And we at UNHCR are aware that this is the mixed migration, that you have migrants and you have refugees. Now, I always feel obliged to make a difference and explain that migrants and refugees are not the same. Migrants migrate, refugees flee. Migrants move for the reason of having a better life. Refugees are sort of moving in order to save their lives from the war, persecution, and whatnot. Now, this barbed wire is erected for all, and it's clearly in a picture presented as a division of society, but the local society was divided by the wire. And it's clearly shown that you have people who are opposing the wire and people who sort of supporting the wire. But at the same time, there's a story about people, who risking their lives in order to avoid the wire and continue going forward. So for us at the UNHCR, access to territory is something that we really care and believe it's important. Then every single person in need of a protection should have access to territory and right to apply for asylum. Applying for asylum is not against the law. Now we can, if we have more days and roundtable discussion, we can speak about what about for those who are not in need of protection in comparing to these who are in need of protection. But this is the great film. It really speaks what was happening at the time several years ago and before the war in Ukraine and after 2015, and everybody was sort of looking at the major crisis. But as also shown in the film, as we all know as well, the barbed wire is not going to stop migration. So, this is the great film, and I'm very glad to be part of this discussion because I believe this film is a great foundation for dialogues like this to take place.
Thank you. András, would you agree with this sort of a division between refugees and migrants? And also coming from a country that also unfortunately has a wire fence throughout the border with Serbia, maybe you could draw some comparisons also between how the local communities react to it.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. And yeah, I probably first I just want to join Zoran about his opinion about the film. I also like it very much. I watched it several times over the past year or so, and I was even working with it, using it for a little training. So it is really a very good piece, and it is especially good as I think it shows us how difficult it is to come up with simple answers to very complicated and complex issues. And I think migration is one of those issues. So I mean, your question, Milena, whether I would agree with this division, I should say yes and no. I mean, yes, because it's a definition. It's definitely something which helps us to tell people apart, to decide who to work with, to decide who to let in and who to keep away, and also it may help us to sort of settle goals or objectives, and also even and I think it's important. It even leads us into the realm of morality, like who is the good and who is the bad. And probably that's the ultimate thing, and this is the thing then which, if you bring it back to here and now, to the actual stories, then it gets awful complicated. And this is what we see in this film, that when there's something going on, people are on the move. They want to get into European countries or just pass through these countries, and all of them have a story. And I think it's very good that we don't learn much about these stories. So we see these people, we see them appearing here and there, but it's much more about the others, like, I mean, us, those who are part of the local communities, and we need to live our lives in this situation. And that's probably the most difficult part. That I mean, politically, you can make this difference. That okay, you're a refugee, you're a migrant, and but then I mean, the next question is how you implement these policies. And then what we see, and what we have seen for the past couple of years in this part of Europe, that is getting increasingly, on one hand, restrictive, but not only restrictive, but unfortunately increasingly violent as well. Because, you know, defining people and telling them apart is one thing, and then sort of enforcing it and making sure that these people behave according to the labels we put on their foreheads is slightly different. And this is what we see here. This is what, like, there's a very strong testimony in the film when somebody tells a story that how he lost his friend, and in Hungary just last week a very long court case was closed, in which actually border police were forcing people back into a ice-cold river, making them swimming back to Serbia, and one of them died, one of them drowned. And actually, so you can see, I mean, how far these issues can lead. And that's something which I mean, you asked, Milena, that was the other question. I mean, what are the similarities and differences between the situation in Hungary and a border? Like, I mean, on one hand, that the border fence at the Hungarian-Serbian border is a much more sophisticated and a much more brutal, I should say, object. It's extremely militarized and extremely well patrolled. And even though, as Zoran, what you said, I mean, barbed wires and fences don't stop people. And this is what we see in Hungary too. But I mean, people still keep coming. So actually, what changes and what gets probably bigger is on one hand human suffering, and on the other hand, the cost of migration in enemies, the cost on the local communities, the cost on the people, and also the cost on the whole society. And this is what we see in Hungary, that there is an increasingly violent discourse on immigration, because this is what follows these measures. So at the moment, it seems to be an ongoing war which the government wages on immigration. I mean, on irregular or uncontrolled immigration, but we don't really see whether this war could be be won. Or I mean, if you want to win this war, probably maybe we'll have time to talk about this. Probably you should look for other means than erecting fences. So yeah, that's what comes to my mind.
Speaking of the war against migration, and I think it is quite striking to see how our borders are becoming increasingly not only fortified, but in a way militarized. While this border that Tiha, your documentary is focusing on most is not as violent maybe as, for example, southern Hungarian border, we unfortunately also do have an issue of Croatian borders with Serbia or with Bosnia and Herzegovina. And if I'm not mistaken, you did some principal photography in Bosnia as well. So what in the end affected your decision to focus on, this specific part of the border? And how do you actually see this contrast between, the northern and the southern borders of Croatia, so to speak?
Sorry, I was muted. As I said, the beginning point of the film making process was a small community which is being divided by the wire, and whatever comes out of it. There was a completely different range of sub-themes within that. But as I continued spending, the more time I spent there, the more intensely the migrants were present, although they were not hardly ever visibly there. Everyday reality was being changed because of the migrants. Constant conversation were the migrants. And I just felt that I should use the privilege of the camera and find these migrants and bring them forward as humans, not as a phenomenon. So we needed to have a little bit of a discussion for the production to expand. And that's really when we decided that I should go to Bosnia. That's when I first encountered the realities of something which is called the Balkan route, because the Balkan migrant route had obviously shifted towards this little canyon where I was filming at the time when I was filming, and it was shifting there because it was a very difficult area to trespass. The violence was becoming more intensive. The surveillance was becoming more effective. So obviously people on the move were looking for areas which were more difficult to monitor. And that's how they entered this canyon, which was always expecting to remain free of migrants. So basically, when I went into Bosnia, it was a whole new level of reality, much more in your face, much more brutal. I encountered the realities of individuals from Europe who were working as humanitarians for years and years on the route, changing their location, mostly of them being deeply frustrated and traumatized by something which was happening, something which was seeming like efforts in vain, because the migrant wave is obviously intensifying. When it was big, when it was exploding, like in 2015, of course, it was in the news. But then it's just becoming forgotten now. And when the film became extended to the theme of the migrant route by going to Bosnia, we had an internal discussion on the level of the project if there was space for another migrant film, because the market, if you look at it from a business side, is also saturated. Simply, we've had enough. And in my work and through festivals, I've encountered quite a few broken film directors who had mentally and emotionally broken film directors and cinematographers who had spent years and years documenting different regions on the Mediterranean route, obviously, the entire European migration route, who were just feeling it was all in vain. and there's too much suffering, and there's no visibility, and nothing can be done. So obviously, I also had a bit of a shock when I first discovered this reality. And I filmed a lot in Bosnia, and I had a lot of material, which was very hard and difficult. But at the end, I had to make a decision on what the film was about and on what level of film within the film something as one piece of art can handle. So I decided to have just a small segment of Bosnia at the end, which was kind of not as brutal, not as harsh, not kind of harsh news, but again, a human story of a local who is working with migrants there, and the realities of migrants living with the local community there, which is completely different. The nature of life there with migrants is different because the migrants are part of daily life. They're completely mixed with the locals, and the locals there are therefore dealing with whole new level of challenges. So I decided I did have some reviews which said that the film kind of maybe clumsily makes, aesthetically it changes, but on a human level and on a level of documenting something that's happening at this time, in this place, I felt that I wanted to go there, even if it meant not being aesthetically completely in harmony, but I felt that was not the most important thing. Form was not more important than what I felt I was doing, and I really felt that I was the only thing I could do was document and insert in time, which will probably be in some textbooks in the future, and we will yet to see what the next chapters are.
Speaking of the next chapters, Zoran, I think you have a very good overview of the trends throughout the route, and I suppose also some forecasts. So this is also one of the questions that the audience asked. How do you see the future of this route shifting, changing, growing or shrinking? But also one of the members of the audience asked, how do you see the future of immigration policies and the refugee treatment in Europe and worldwide? Because the spectator feels, and I would unfortunately agree, that people are getting more and more desensitized to this topic. So how to tackle this?
Well, it's $1 million question if you ask me. I don't think it's possible to have scientific or even educated guess in terms of like what's going to happen with migration. I can tell you only unless the reasons for migration are dealt with, migration and refugees are going to be a story of our generation, so to speak. We have Syrian war of 12 years. We have conflicts that are not being resolved for years now, and that produces migration and refugees. Now we speak about Balkan route. There are like all bunch of routes and like people choose. And UNHCR was always saying like that some sort of pathway need to be secured for people on a move. I mean, I understand the people and refugees. I was refugees myself. I decided to go to United States to be refugees in the war in the 90s because my best friend lived in Los Angeles. So I knew that I'm going to have a place to stay and sleep on the floor in his living room, and I'm not going to be kicked out on the street. If he was living in Sweden, I probably would come to Sweden. If he was living wherever, in Hungary, I would have gone and be now, András is like, friend and citizen of Hungary. So refugees very often, and migrants as well, decide of final destination based on several factors: friends, relatives, employment possibilities, integration. So, and it's a very, I think this film showed also that the people have a perception that refugees on the move don't have information. They do. They pretty much know where to go, where to cross. and what is their destination. Now, very often they have to go and deal with smugglers because there is no sort of legal, I don't want to say legal, there is no way for them to go to the more secure way. So they have to pay for smugglers. We also see that not in the film The Wire, in all movies that are being addressing this issue, we see what's happening to them. The money is being stolen, their life is in danger. Very often we read that there is like so many refugees and migrants dying in a truck that's being locked up and the people running away from the police. So the future of immigration, the refugee movement of migrants, to me, is to deal with the reasons of movement, if possible, and then see what is the possibility of and how to integrate, how to secure, and how to accept. Because like now I was in Baghdad for 2 months for CNN in 2005, and this country is still in conflict, so to speak. Syria, 12 years. We have, I don't even want to go and name conflicts around the world, but unless we as a society address that, the movement is going to stay. And I don't even want to go and bother audience and us on a panel with the climate change refugees that also is going to happen in the future. So to me, the main issue is how to solve the reasons of people on the move. Because I didn't want to leave Sarajevo. I wanted to live happily ever after in my hometown. And refugees that I speak to, they didn't want to leave their cities. And when you speak to, let's say, to refugees from Syria, they didn't want to leave Aleppo, and Aleppo was leveled, and they don't have any choice. They don't want to leave Homs, but Homs is leveled. They don't have any choice. They don't want to leave, any other place, but then ISIS come to their door. So, and they all, when you speak to them, have desire and wish to go back home. And that's a different issue. Do you have home to come back to? And again, to me, I don't, I want to keep my key messages until you all remember them. But the solving the root of migration is the main issue to me.
It is true that it will take years, if not decades, to tackle with the cause of this sort of forced migration nobody chose for themselves. But meanwhile, unfortunately, there are still decisions to make for people who are here now in these transit or host countries. So maybe, András, you could tell us, I'm also often, people ask me this question, what can we do? And sometimes I'm having a hard time replying, but there is always something a local person, a citizen of Europe or of the Western Balkan countries can do. But also, we're talking a lot about the shrinking space for the NGOs, especially in countries, unfortunately, such as Hungary and Croatia. Are these, I would say, is this scope of what a citizen can do shrinking in Hungary as well? How do you see it?
Well, again, this is a pretty complicated one because I think what Zoran said about people on the move, so whether they are voluntarily on the move or whether they are forced to leave places which they don't really want to leave, it's only one side of the story. The other side of the story is about those people and those communities where these other people arrive, or what these other people choose as their place of destination. And I think in an ideal world, I mean, it's not only the case that you don't have to leave your place if you don't want to, because you have the right and you have the possibility to stay there, but also you need the right and possibility to live with those people and the kind of people you feel comfortable with. And nobody wants to live with you without your consent. And this is what actually is the core of the policy and political debates these days. And this is what many people start asking all around Europe. whether are we the ones who should take all the responsibility for the problems, for the wars, for the famines, for the global climate change, and for the suffering of those millions, tens and hundreds of millions who probably would be better off if they moved a couple hundred or couple thousand kilometers away. So this is how it starts. And then of course, I mean, there are different answers. So some of us say that, yes, I mean, this is definitely our ultimate responsibility to care for these people and to make as much as possible to accommodate them. And yet again, there are others who say that, well, no, I mean, let's consider, let's decide on our own community, let's decide who to let in, and there are certain people whom we don't want to let in. And I mean, this is the very, I mean, I'm simplifying a lot, but this is the space, I mean, what you said, a space which is shrinking, in which, like, people, citizens, or even communities, NGOs who decide to be welcoming, to help the people who arrive, to give them a chance, or to give the basic support they need, start increasingly find themselves in conflict with other members of the community, politicians representing these people, or people who are asking protection from the politicians, from the authorities, who probably don't see and find receiving immigrants or helping refugees such a good idea as some of us would. And I mean, that's the story here. And actually, what we experience in Hungary is something which is probably sort of like a laboratory case of these kind of conflicts, because our government is pretty outspoken on its position vis-a-vis or regarding uncontrolled immigration and regarding asylum. I think that's also very important. I mean, in Hungary, probably it's not a well-known fact, but you can see it in statistical data. Since 2015, when actually the government came up with its very, very radical and tough communication on irregular immigration and asylum, and since the government started to first tighten up and then virtually dismantle Hungary's asylum system, the number of labor immigrants into the country has gone up fivefold. So there are 5 times more labor immigrants in the country than it was in 2015. Even in 20, the COVID year, I mean, people were losing their jobs, but the number of labor immigrants still were increasing. And the same for student immigrants. So people from African, Asian countries, there are 4 times more international students in the country than they used to be. So I mean, Budapest and bigger country towns are becoming, I mean, visibly multicultural and multi-ethnic. And yet the overall disposition vis-a-vis asylum and regarding immigration of those people who are in need of help, who are in need of integration and accommodation is still very, very, very tough and harsh. And I mean, in this environment for NGOs like our NGO, it is very difficult to work, but it's not impossible to work. I mean, what you see that there is a polarized debate, and very likely it is only the minority who supports the idea of helping refugees or letting people in without any apparent economic benefit. But you still find these people who support you and who team up with you, who volunteer for you, who donate your cause. But on the other hand, you also find others, and also you are pretty much targeted by political campaigning or media messaging, which is pretty unpleasant. And I mean, initially we were sort of surprised and shocked, but then we had to learn that, I mean, there is a debate, there is a sort of diversity of opinions around, and not everybody likes what we say and what we believe. So actually, this is our responsibility to explain and to tell people why we believe it and why we like it and why we would like the country as we would. So indirectly, I should say it even helps us to become more reflecting on the things we do, to think more about our principles, and also to try understanding our fellow citizens probably much more and much better than we used to.
Thank you. Zoran wants to intervene as well.
Yes, I want to say something, and I would also like to remind our audience, because so far we have been focusing on very negative side of community and society towards refugees and migrants. But I think it's a fair, and it's time maybe now to say, because András had a really nice segue to what I'm going to say. The Hungarian society, the citizens and people show tremendous support to Ukrainian refugees. I spent days on Záhony, in Záhony on the border, and I've seen Hungarians like bringing, helping, offering help, even to this day. So I don't think it's fair that we reflect always negatively when speaking about local communities in terms of refugees and migrants. Ukrainian war in Ukraine show us that there is a different side of society that we have seen before. Now we can go and discuss reasons, to more extent. However, I think it's important to say that what I've seen in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, in Hungary, in all countries that I traveled to, in Poland, and all countries bordering with Ukraine, I've seen nothing but support of a local community and people of those countries. Now, I also think it's very important that we remind our viewers that very often we are faced with the notion that all refugees come to Europe. I would love to remind our viewers that 85% of refugees stay in undeveloped countries. They don't come to Europe. Turkey is hosting almost 4 million people. Colombia, Germany, when you look per capita, Pakistan, Uganda, they're all countries, And now we go to Slovenia, where this picture speaks about it. I was looking at the numbers today. Slovenia has 8,000 people with approved temporary protection, and another 8,000 people in the process. So let's say all those 8,000 approved, it's going to be 16,000 people in Slovenia. I'm speaking about Slovenia because the film speaks about that country and the border. So we need to very often to put things in perspective and look from different angles in order to understand situation and context a little bit better.
Yeah, how do you explain this new wave of solidarity, so to speak, towards Ukrainian refugees? We had a similar thing on the Balkan route in 2015, but it did kind of shift in the end. Some people even say that it might be a matter of institutional racism that we are dealing with two groups of refugees, let's put it that way differently. What is your opinion? And also maybe you could address one of the questions from the chat, because one person wanted to know if there are any consequences for people like Mama who are supporting refugees on the route.
I want to say I really appreciated what you said, Zoran, and how you stirred the conversation to something which I actually also feel. What is happening now is in Europe is obviously it's not an idea someone had. It's a consequence of systematic destruction of a part of the world, of a world. And it was very much destroyed and exploited by Western Europe, Northern Europe. It's also a consequence of industrial pollution and Sahara Desert spreading, and so on. So it's a grand systematic problem. The biggest issues which on a personal level brought concerns to me while I was working on this film are also mostly on a systematic level. So the official welcome of the people on the move by the European Union is beating, extensive, brutal violation of human rights. Every time I went to Bosnia, it was like entering a war zone. Someone I met 5 days ago is now sitting by the border looking like a Second World War partisan with bondages, with a broken lip, men crying on the street, and at the same time, local community living with this as something normal. Another systematic welcome is the wires. I appreciate the nature of the wire, which I was filming, because it actually doesn't stop anyone. There are wires which are so difficult to cross, but this wire is just there to be there. It doesn't stop anyone. And that is a symptom of Europe, a symptom of a system which is not doing a good job. It's hardly ever a problem of small, ordinary people. There are people who have extreme views. There will always be polarization. And in my observation, these people are usually louder. And the majority is usually not informed and unable to access information. And people who are just ordinary, normal, kind people, which I think is the majority, are usually silent. People like Mama. Mama is a silent woman who is just helping. And she had issues with those who were loud. And she had to, recently she actually she started a defamation trial to protect herself, and she won. Because there's obviously, such as the human nature, always an extreme person or an extreme group who has something to say. But in general, people are kind and people are welcoming until proven otherwise. And the opposite proof comes as a result of negligence, and of violence, of the welcome we are giving to those people. People who are on the move are, of course, culturally completely different to people they're being welcomed by. But I will never forget one scene. I mean, I always have Bosnia in my heart so closely, because Bosnia and Herzegovina is a territory which has not recovered from war yet. I mean, this whole former Yugoslavia, we are poorer than many countries in the West, and people struggle. The daily normality of this region is that there is always crisis. And obviously I would encounter so many people who live a humble life by the Bosnian border. And one night I was in a park with a person from production, a guy, a friend. The two of us went to a park just to talk to some migrants, which we saw there. And there's just a group of guys hanging out in a park. And I saw, it was quite late at night, and I saw a woman very humbly dressed, kind of almost in rags, and a child and a man, a husband and a wife and a child. And they were passing through the dark, and she just came to the light towards us and the migrants, and she just handed them a plastic bag with yogurt, some salami and a bread. And she said, "There you go." And she left. And this is something I encountered more. I encountered a lot of this kind of behavior and a lot of frustration. Frustration before any call to action or being against. And there's still a lot of space between frustration and being against. And I think that it is the system's responsibility to break, to put a gap between the frustration and the movement against. And the system is the cause of a lot of frustration. The amount of effort I have seen on the route to keep these realities as invisible has made me feel like a liar and an idiot, going out of the realities of the daily life on the migrant route and going back into my daily normality. So I always say that I put my faith in the ordinary, and in the years of peace and education European society has had. And I'm hoping there is enough aware in the individuals to bring forward a collective mass of kindness. Now, I'm an artist, obviously I'm a romantic, I'm a believer, but this is really what I have seen while working on the film and in life in general. But unfortunately, yeah, also at the same time, while I was working on the film, I was just looking at the rules of history which are being repeated at the moment. I was having this feeling which I was ashamed of, and I was feeling like a panicking person with a bit of a PTSD from our war. And I was feeling like Europe is on the verge of a war, because looking at everything, just it's a copy paste of what has happened in the history before a big break. And unfortunately, now we have what we have. So yeah, I do put my trust in the ordinary people, and I don't see much of a point in comparing the Ukrainian refugees with what's happening on the other side. I'm grateful for the welcome of the Ukrainian refugees, and I'm just hoping that it's an influence which can expand towards a more humane, systematic approach to the issue of big migrations coming from the south and the east towards Europe, because it's happening, it's not going to change, and the only thing which can change is the systematic response.
Thank you, Tiha, for these beautiful and very important points. I think they would be a perfect way to conclude this debate, but at the same time, I would like to hear some final words from the other two panelists. And also maybe, Zoran, if you could take it from here, you could also address this last question that stayed unanswered. Somebody wanted to know what is happening now with the barbed wire, and is it being removed after Croatia entered Schengen area?
Well, that barbed wire, I mean, local community wants to be, majority of local community wants the barbed wire to be removed. I believe after the change of the government in Slovenia, the momentum is to barbed wire to be removed. And I think it's going to be. And when I last was reading it and doing my research or what's going on with the wire, it is my understanding it is going to be moved gradually in sort of phases. And I think I read somewhere that somebody says it might take even 4 years, but I think it's going to be, the removal is going to start soon, again, due to the change of the government, that it's more open to addressing migration and refugees differently than the government of Janez Janša previously. And also because maybe of the pressure, like clearly explain, and that's beauty of the film, when you had a policeman explaining to local community why they have to have a barbed wire, and local community keep saying like, you don't understand, I'm going to lose my business, I'm going to lay off 11 people, etc., etc. And I think those voices now are stronger than opposing one. And it is my understanding the barbed wire is going to be soon not removed, but the removal process will start.
Thank you, dear Zoran. András, maybe also to conclude with some few points from Hungary. When do you see the end of your barbed wire? And speaking about the difficult situation that you're in, where do you maybe see some specks of hope for Hungary's attitude towards migration? If you could just unmute, please.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I don't see much change coming in the near future, though. I mean, one can never know. I mean, regarding all wire, what we see, however, and I very much support what Tiha just said about people's, I mean, individual people's compassion and positive attitude. I think it is very much there, and this is something which in the long run may influence and change policies. Because interestingly, I remember a public opinion poll in I think it was towards the end of 2015 or maybe the beginning of 2016, where the results were apparently very controversial and ambiguous, because the majority of the people said that they would absolutely help refugees in need and people fleeing conflicts and people needing help. They even said that they themselves volunteer for these jobs. And at the same time, the majority of these people also said that they agree with the government's tight and harsh policies. So apparently people don't really see, I mean, how the two things are affecting each other and interlinked. And this is the problem as well, that, I mean, at the moment, the fence is there. It is increasingly difficult to, quote unquote, protect this fence and prevent people from moving in. So actually the violence escalates. And then, there are ordinary people, actually thousands and tens of thousands of people doing their military service, doing their police jobs, doing shifts at the border, witnessing or even committing these violent crimes. And then they just go back to their local communities with it and live with it as, as a normal experience. And of course, it's not a normal experience. So many of them are pretty much traumatized. I myself know people in person who've seen things, and they didn't agree with that. But that becomes part of normalcy. And if nobody talks about that, and nobody points at the deep contradiction between your humanity and your compassion, and actually what you are forced to do by those legal and policy frameworks in which you act, then at the end, I mean, how you solve this this contradiction? You simply start believing that whatever you do is the right thing, and this is something which is part of normalcy. So I think this is what is at stake here. That I mean, those violence, which is probably sporadic, which is not yet institutional, becomes so much normal, so much part of our everyday life that at the end we won't even realize, I mean, how cruel and how brutal we become. And so that's why I think we need to keep reminding both ourselves and people around us that this is not normal and very, very hopefully not the only way of sorting out these problems.
Thank you. Tiha, so much time after the premiere of your film, we can still talk for hours about this topic. And I feel both of your feature documentaries were, I would say, an endless topic in a way, even though quite intimate view at it. So there was also one question, and I think this is a good question to conclude today's conversation with. What are you working on now? Will it be equally maybe exciting and divisive topic as the last two, or is it completely something different this time?
The true answer is nothing. I'm working on nothing. Let's not pretend. I'm a slow author, and for a long time after my first film came out, I really didn't want to work on anything, because I deeply felt that I only want to work on something I really feel. I know it's such an exhausting process. My first film was personal project. It was connected to my family, but this one also broke me deeply. It broke me on many levels, and if I'm gonna go into that, I need to know why. So I'm not rushing, but I am excited about a number of ideas, not like 100, but I have 5 or 6 ideas in my head. It's a bit of a pomegranate, but no juice yet. I am in an interview, blabbing in an interview at something recently, I spat out something which I think is true, that regardless of subjects which interest me, which I think is mostly environmental and arts connected. I did something connected to arts, more local story in the meantime. And I also I always have an idea of, I will do a story which will just bring joy. Because that's what we need. But somehow it turns out that I am probably on a personal level kind of occupied with violation of human rights, and it always finds me. So hopefully I will create another film which will give me a reason to deeply immerse myself into a subject, and hopefully it will make sense at the end. But I have not started plowing yet. It's just scratches at the moment.
Tiha, Zoran, András, thank you very much for your participation tonight. And I would also like to thank our audience for a very active engagement. We got a lot of questions. That is always encouraging to see that we are speaking about the topic that people still do find relevant, despite all the new catastrophes, so to speak, that way, that are now taking most of the media space. So thank you one more time, and thank you also KineDok for having us tonight, and I hope to see you soon in another conversation in this format, or even better, in person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This was great.
Okay, we're done.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.